Hello, hello. Welcome to the Global Citizen Therapy Podcast, the podcast for women of color who are daughters of immigrants to feel seen, heard, and validated. My name is Nancy Diaz, and I am a trauma-informed therapist, speaker, and your podcast host today. And now, let's jump into today's episode. Hello. I thought I'd start us off today with a bit of Lizzo's Pink. Oh my God. So yes, everyone is talking about this Barbie movie, and to the point that I finally had to see it because yes, everyone I know is talking about it. And when I heard that feminists liked it, I was surprised because I think just from seeing the billboard of the Barbie movie, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna watch that. That just seems like not something that I want to see. And it's interesting, I think, even analyzing my own thoughts, feelings about the Barbie movie and what came up for me. But I realized that there was quite a bit of anger and quite a bit of resentment toward Barbie still to this day, and I just thought I'd share a bit of my thoughts around Barbie the doll, around Barbie the movie, and kind of my thoughts as a therapist and how it relates to mental health. There were, some interesting themes of mental health and of all kinds of different things in this movie. And so yeah, let's dive into it. So I think what came up for me when I first saw, and heard the hype about the Barbie movie was, oh my God, I see the picture right away of the tall blonde Barbie, and I was like, oh my God, are we still, portraying this problematic image of, women are supposed to be tall, blonde, and with just ridiculous body standards, and so that was my first thought of, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's 2023 and we're still going to, perpetuate this really negative kind of idea that we should all look exactly like Barbie. And if we don't, then we should feel so much shame, right? So yes, that was my first thought, right? And then when it came out and people started talking about it, I was like, okay, well let's see, right? What's going on there? But I think for me, like even when I, heard people talking about it, I still didn't really want to see it because I just thought, I have complicated feelings about Barbie the doll. I grew up with Barbies. I actually had, oh, I think I counted them at one point and I had over 100 Barbies. It's insane, and this doesn't this doesn't mean that I grew up with tons of money that I could afford a new Barbie every day. But actually it just it's funny because my mom would actually take us through the alleys. This was when I was growing up in Chicago, and we'd go through the alleys on walks and things like that, and we started to notice that our white neighbors, they would throw away all their kids' toys. And so, yeah, quite often when we'd be walking down the alley, there'd be pretty much brand new toys in the alley that they were throwing away. And so that's how I ended up having that many Barbies, is just from people throwing them away. And yeah, I think I didn't really ever get to choose the Barbies that I had. They were secondhand, saved from the dumpsters. So yeah, all of my Barbies, I think, were white. I don't remember having any other Barbie other than the traditional, blonde Barbie. But I do know that at one point I had gotten a doll. I think it was from my aunt, and she lived in California, and she had shipped me a doll. I think it was for my birthday or for Christmas, I can't remember. And this was one of those life-size dolls. So at this point, I don't know how old I was. I was maybe 8, 9. I don't know. I was, a little bit old for dolls, but she had shipped me this doll, and it was, life size. It was like my size, right? And yeah, and she was black. And I think as soon as we opened it, my mom's reaction was, to start giggling and like, oh, the negrita, like, yeah, the little black doll. And so then, of course, like, we base our reactions off of our parents' reactions. So I think, yeah, naturally me and I think my little sister, she was just tiny at that point, but yeah, I just started laughing, right? And even I remember my best friend growing up, she was over as well when I got that shipment. And yeah, I remember that it was supposed to be this joke, right? Of like, oh, like, oh, this isn't, she's not very pretty, right? Like it's a black doll, and and it was this big joke of, oh, let's take a picture with the negrita, to send to your aunt so she could see that we got it. And I remember that it just became like this running joke throughout the whole summer of, like that the negrita, the doll was not very pretty, that she was ugly. And no, there was actually nothing wrong with the doll. The doll, thinking back, didn't, yeah, there was nothing wrong with the person who created it. I know some dolls, you know what I mean? Like, you've seen the dolls that are just like, oh man, that is an ugly doll, doesn't matter. The skin tone on that doll, that is just, that was designed pretty poorly, that it comes out kind of creepy looking, or just, yeah, I've seen those dolls that can just kind of be scary. They've got the eyes that follow you, or like something like that. No, this doll was great. But it became the running joke. And especially, I remember that when we moved to Phoenix, that first summer, I was so excited because for the first time in my life we had a swimming pool. And man, I spent every waking second that first summer in the pool, outside in the hot sun. And so by the end of the summer, yeah, that's the darkest that I've ever been in my life. And yeah, again, it was this running joke, right? Of, oh my God, you look exactly like the negrita, And they said, oh, come here, we're gonna take a picture of you next to the negrita. And so there was always this joke, that this negrita doll was uglier, and that that I shouldn't try to look like that doll, and that I should stay out of the sun, all these things, right? So yeah, I think for me, I always kind of got the messaging that black dolls, or brown dolls, anything other than the tall blonde Barbie doll, was just not going to be pretty, right? It wasn't going to be something that I should aspire to look like. So, yeah, I think, seeing now these posts about, oh, Barbie's so inclusive, Barbie has released this doll and that doll. And of course, even before the Barbie movie, like I remember even the past few years, like every so often, Mattel releases some new Barbie, and it's like, oh, we're supposed to celebrate, right? Like I just saw that they released some new like Bollywood Barbie doll, and we're supposed to celebrate that, we're supposed to celebrate when there's engineer Barbie and astronaut Barbie and all these things. And I just think, yeah, but it seems kind of forced. And it's always, even before the movie, it seemed kind of forced. Like you're just trying to fix what you, like all the damage that you've done, to all the little girls out there who don't look like the tall blonde Barbie. To all the girls, because it's just, if you don't know this, like it's actually physically impossible to have the measurements of the Barbie doll. You wouldn't be alive if you actually were that thin, right? So yeah, it's problematic, I think. And yeah, the fact that they're trying to fix it, with oh, this limited edition, new release. And I was just thinking, like, I haven't been down the toy section of any store like in a while, but I was just thinking, like, okay, if I did want this Teresa Barbie doll, the Hispanic one, whatever, or the Bollywood one, or the Black Barbie, like, would I pay more? I'm pretty sure I would pay more, right? Because it's probably limited edition versus, the tall blonde Barbie I could probably get for, that's probably the cheapest one, the classic original Barbie, right? I'd imagine. Because I know, like, even, we have, what do we have in the dollar stores, right? In the US, we have dollar stores. Even here in Australia, like, I've seen discount stores, that have their cheaper version of the same toys. And so, yeah, what do they have? They have, knockoff Barbie dolls that are the tall blonde ones usually, right? So, yeah, to me, there's just been way too much damage that's been done by Barbie that I was not really wanting to, give them more money and go and see the movie. So I actually watched the movie from the comfort of my own bed so that I could also just kind of process what was coming up for me. Because I think the other thing that came up for me with Barbie was, yeah, just all of the themes I think of the patriarchy and of machismo and of perfectionism. There was, yeah, there was a lot to unpack there. So I'm glad that I actually watched it on my own. And yeah, I wanted to kind of dive into it on this podcast. I know, like, this season we're talking about sex and sexuality, and yeah, I think that there were, some themes of that even in this movie that I was like, let's talk about this because I actually loved the part, and it's supposed to be like a joke, right? It's supposed to be like a funny section of the movie when they are talking about or not talking about sex, right? When Ken asks Barbie if he can sleep over because that's what they're supposed to do. And when Barbie asks, well, what are we supposed to do if you sleep over? And to me, yes, it's funny, but it's also not funny because right away I just thought like, wow, but that's a reality for so many people, right? And I just thought, this is really funny for someone who, has grown up in a family where they've openly talked about sex, where they've actually had the talk about the birds and the bees like you see in the movies and in the TV shows, right? Like, I always thought that those scenes were so interesting because I was like, whoa, there's no way that my parents would ever like sit me down and actually explain like the birds and the bees and what sex actually is. And yeah, I think it's uncomfortable, for most people, for most parents to have this type of conversation. But I think, in a lot of cultures, it's not done at all. They don't even try, right? And it's just completely ignored, right? And you're just supposed to figure it out on your own. So that's why for me, it kind of struck a chord when I saw that scene because I'm like, yeah, it's funny, but it's also like a reality for so many people of like you're not, you have no idea. Like, okay, yeah, you're supposed to spend the night with your partner or boyfriend or husband or person that you love, but you don't know what exactly you're supposed to be doing, right? And then if you have a partner of the same sex, then there's even more confusion of, oh, well, I have really no idea what to do because I don't even have movies and TV shows oftentimes to kind of go off of, right? Plus, they always, yeah, they cut the scenes out, right? When it gets to good parts, so you have no idea really what you're thinking of. And if you're like me and you grew up in a strict religious household, like I know for me, it was always the case that if there was a novela on, like a soap opera on, and there was a sex scene coming up, oh, my parents were on it. They were, even if they were falling asleep, they'd wake up in a second and change the channel. And yeah, they didn't want us to see any of that. So it's just something that's so taboo. There's, like right away, even that, just changing the channel. It's, yeah, you have no idea what you're really getting into. And that's why, at least for me, I saw so much teenage pregnancy in my high school. My high school was, probably like 99% Hispanic. There was a huge amount of Hispanic students. And so, yeah, the teen pregnancy numbers, they were sky high. There was no sex education class. And so, yeah, our parents don't talk to us about these things. We have no idea what we're doing. And, yep, then you're pregnant. It's, yeah, it's unfortunate. But I think, like, I saw that scene and I was like, yeah, no, that one, it's funny, but not funny because when you don't know what you're doing when it comes to sex, there's so many things that can go wrong. Pregnancy, STIs, right? Sexually transmitted infections. But yeah, there's so many other things as well. Like even the fact that we don't talk about, things like cervical cancer, and HPV, and getting those checks. The fact that we don't talk about, periods, like everything that goes into our cycles, there's just so much that is taboo. So that's, one of the reasons that I wanted to make this season about sex, sexuality, sexual health, but of course about, you know, reproductive health, relationships, about, these things that are affecting us as daughters of immigrants, right? So, yeah, going back to this whole thing of things not being talked about, right? That kind of takes us into the next thing that I saw, right? Which is, yeah, right in the beginning of the Barbie movie, there's, of course, there's the theme of, of mental health and of thoughts of wanting to die, right? So, yes, I think that this is a really important one for us as daughters of immigrants to take away is that, yeah, things can look really perfect on the outside, but you have no idea what the thoughts are for someone, right? What it is that they could be going through, what it is that they could be struggling with. And sometimes the more perfect that things seem, the more that you might struggle with thinking, I need to be grateful because everything is perfect. I have everything that I wanted. I have everything that society tells me I'm supposed to want. And so I shouldn't want more. I should just be grateful and be happy that I am okay, that I have everything, right? And there's the pressure, right, of everyone around you wanting this same thing, right? And because you seem to have it all, then you feel even more like you can't talk to anyone else about it, right? And when Barbie finally says, like, does anyone else have thoughts of dying? The music stops, right? And everyone looks at her and no one knows what to do. So I think that's a really good point to make that, yeah, sometimes when you do bring something like this up, people have no idea what to do with it. And so the only way to make people like you, again, after you mess up, quote unquote, mess up, by bringing up something around mental health and around thoughts of, you struggling, the only way to get back that sense of normalcy is just to pretend that you were joking, pretend that you know, that it's not serious, pretend that everything's okay. And so often, I think, as women, and especially as women of color, we want to do everything for others, right? And I'm not just talking about give, and give your time and energy and money and whatever, but I'm talking about even give a part of yourself away, right? Reject parts of yourself just so that others can be comfortable. And I think that that's something that I see that we do so often. It's something that's so hard for us to unlearn. It's so hard for us to learn that we can speak up, that we can actually say what it is that we're thinking, what it is that we're feeling. And I think for us, so many times we say these things to the wrong person, right? And by that, I don't mean just because someone can't be there for you, hold space for you, say the right things to you, the things that you want to hear, that you need to hear. It doesn't mean that they are a bad person, right? There isn't really this good and bad. It's not just that black and white, right? But it just means that, okay, it's very real. And I want to, validate your feelings here. If you've ever felt this way of like, oh, I regret telling that person that particular thing, opening up to them about that particular thing, that's okay. And it's okay if you now feel like I shouldn't talk about this ever again because that reaction that I got was so terrible, right? So, yes, first of all, have some compassion for yourself because it makes sense that you now don't want to talk about certain things because of the reaction that you got the first time around or even the second time around. Sometimes we keep kind of learning again and again of, okay, these people are not safe, and yet this is my one friend that I've had since I was growing up, and this is the one person that I, feel like I should be able to open up to, and yet they kind of keep saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, and so, yeah, and I think when there's so much stigma around therapy in our communities, in our cultures, it can be really hard to decide, like, hey, I'm gonna take a step back from opening up to my friends because they don't really know what to do with this, and go to a trained professional. That can be a big, scary step. But yeah, I do also want to recognize that sometimes you do go to a trained mental health professional, and especially if they're not, culturally sensitive, or trauma informed, or whatever it is, for whatever reason they're not a good fit, they may also end up, saying the wrong thing or making you feel invalidated. Like, I know as a therapist, like, I do hear these horror stories quite often from clients that come to me of, I don't know about therapy, and when I ask them, like, what are you looking for in a therapist? It's sad, the things that I hear, because what I hear from them are things that I'm like, well, that's kind of what any therapist should be doing, right? Like, there shouldn't be any judgment, there shouldn't be any shame, or why didn't you report this to the police, or why didn't you do this or say that. But so often I'm hearing these things. Anyway, kind of a sidetrack there. But yeah, I think so often we don't talk about these things because people don't know how to react to them, right? They don't know how to respond. And so, yes, I think there was quite a bit of that was coming up for me. I was like, man, yeah, it must be so hard to be, in her shoes and have these thoughts of dying and not really know what to do with it. And I think that probably resonated for a lot of us, that when we're struggling, we don't know who to talk to about it. And so we just do what we see everyone else doing, which is to continue pretending, right? But I am really glad, to see so many people starting to reach out for help, starting to prioritize their mental health, starting to invest their time and their money, looking for resources, spending. It does take time. It does take time to find the right therapist, to find someone who's culturally informed, who's going to actually help you, regardless of the cultural differences, all these things, right? It takes time, but I'm seeing, so many people. I mean, it's incredible. And I did the math, and there were 102 people total that signed up for the workshops that I ran last month in July. That's insane. That's an insane amount of people. I love that. I absolutely love that. And if you attended, one of those workshops or trainings, yes, I'm so grateful. I was so happy to see so many people, showing up for themselves, showing up for the other people in their lives, showing up because they wanted to learn, wanted to improve their relationship with themselves, with others, have better romantic relationships, learn about all these, taboos, talk about them openly, right? All these things that are taboo, like sex and dating and all of these things, right? I love that. So, yes, man, there was a lot in this movie. So moving on, the machismo. Man, we talked about machismo in the dating workshop, and I think watching this movie, we saw a bit of it, right? Not too much, but yeah, I think it was just kind of intermixed when we saw like the patriarchy, right, and that sharp contrast, I think, between Barbie land and the real world. And it was, yeah, it was really interesting that that's kind of how they portrayed it, right? They kind of exaggerated when Ken brought back the patriarchy into Barbie land. We kind of saw, that all the testosterone and the aggression and, even some jealousy and, yeah, the things that make up this big macho man. And so, yeah, it was really interesting. And of course, there's the women who all of a sudden turn into bimbos, right? Who all of a sudden are just supposed to sit there and look pretty and get the men the beers, right? And just listen to them talk and mansplain things to them, right? It's, yeah. And I think watching that, I was like, yeah, that is so many of us, right? That even those of us who are feminists, and when we're going to therapy, we're doing the work, it can still be so easy for us to kind of fall back into those roles, right? And I've been having conversations lately with people about the fact that women often over explain, and people sometimes ask me all the time, like, okay, so if I talk a lot, right, and I have this tendency to just talk and talk and talk, like, is that okay? Is that something I should work on? And yes, the reality is that it is, a trauma response, and it also does stem from, the patriarchy, because for so long, women have been silenced and ignored and put down and shamed and gaslit and all the things, right? We're made to feel like we're not good enough. And so, just in that, we start to feel smaller and smaller to the point that we don't want to speak up, raise our voices, speak our truths, our opinions, any of that, right? But sometimes it is, physically, right? That we're being silenced, and we're supposed to like that, right? I mean, if you even think about taking this back to sex, right? Who is it that's usually gagged? Who is it that has, the blindfold, like all these things, right? Like in the movies, it's always the women, right? And so we're supposed to just sit there and lay there and take it, right? And we're supposed to be submissive. And so that's what you see in the movie as well, right? This theme of, okay, the man is supposed to be aggressive and you're supposed to be submissive and you're supposed to enjoy it, right? Whatever it is, whether we're talking about in the bedroom or whether we're talking about you're supposed to like going to get me a beer, you're supposed to enjoy that. That's, you're supposed to see it as a privilege that I'm letting you go get me a beer. And so yeah, it is really interesting. I think that that's why so many people like the Barbie movie, because for I think the first time ever, we're actually seeing this out in the open. Like we're actually calling it out. I think a few movies like here and there might touch on themes, but it's not as overt, as in your face of like, whoa, yeah, that's true. Like this is kind of the world that we live in, where women are supposed to be submissive and we're not supposed to make waves. We're supposed to be quiet. We're not supposed to have our own ideas, and we're supposed to behave in a certain way, walk in a certain way, talk in a certain way to not make men uncomfortable, right? And so yeah, I think there's a lot of that, putting on the cultural lens. There's a lot of that in communities of color where yes, women are supposed to be innocent, right? And we're supposed to be pure, like the Virgin Mary, right? If you grew up Catholic like I did, there's all of this, right? That you're supposed to wait until marriage, and that you're supposed to, sit with your legs crossed always. You're supposed to make sure that the man eats first, right? Whether it's your dad or your brother, you have to like get up, serve them a plate, make them a plate. You're supposed to make sure that you are always polite and quiet and smiling. And this is why, number one episode of the podcast, the one that has the most downloads, is the episode titled Why Am I So Angry? It's because we're bottling all that up, right? So many of us, we are angry, and it's because of the way that we have been treated for so long. We know that it's not right, and we know that it's not fair. We're starting to wake up and see like, oh, hey, this isn't really great. But yet we don't really do anything with that anger. We suppress it, even though we know that we have a right to be angry. And sometimes here and there we might say, oh, hey, like, yeah, I don't think that this is right. Like, we might vent to our friends or something like that. But there's still so much there to process, and we don't know how to release that anger. And yeah, I think that it starts with just acknowledging that anger, acknowledging like, hey, yeah, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to have some of that resentment, because this is the other thing that the patriarchy has taught us, right? That women are supposed to be smiling and happy. We're not supposed to show other emotions like anger or sadness, because then all of a sudden we're labeled as crazy or emotional, and we're not taken seriously, right? So yes, there's a lot to kind of process there. There's, yeah, There's the perfectionism in the Barbie movie as well, right? Where, yeah, we think that we have to be able to do it all, right? And on our own. There's also, the fact that, oh, man, there's so much emphasis on having a partner, right? And feeling like you won't be fulfilled until you have a partner or until you're married or until you have kids. There's so much pressure, oftentimes from our families and from society, for us to go down that very traditional path, when in reality, there's so many people deciding not to get married, not to have kids. There's people living all kinds of different lives and realizing that they're much happier going the untraditional way, right? So, yes, I did like that part of the movie that they actually, showed that Barbie does not want to be with Ken in the end, right? And chooses not to be with him, chooses to finally tell him, like, hey, I'm not feeling it. And I think that that's really great as well. Because so many times you could see, I think, that Barbie might have stayed with him out of that obligation. But sometimes it's, we stay with someone out of that sense of obligation. Sometimes it's out of the guilt, that we feel guilty, because this person is so good for us, and everyone around us is telling us, oh, well, you should be grateful for this person, so you need to, look past their flaws, the flaws that sometimes only you can see, because there are so many things that happen behind closed doors that friends and family, they may not even know. And of course, you don't really want to, yeah, out that person and say, like, hey, well, this is actually what's going on, and this is why I don't want to be with this person. That's you. That's your business. Oh my god, these birds are loud. Sorry, Australian birds. Yes. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, the pressure, right? The pressure to be with someone, whether from family, from society, to stay with that person. It's it's intense sometimes. So being able to take a step back and say, like, hey, maybe I want to spend some time alone, spend some time with myself, and that's okay too. And sometimes you have to, like, push past those feelings of, oh, it's so uncomfortable, for me to be single, to hang out on my own, to go to the movies on my own, to go to dinner on my own. I know for me, that was super uncomfortable in the beginning. It was so scary. I never thought that I would be the type of person that could go to the movies on my own, that could do anything on my own. Because I think, especially, in my culture and the Latino culture, like, family is everything. But friends are also important, and a partner is also so important. But it's always about the people in your life around you. There's not so much emphasis on the self, right? And on hanging out and spending time on your own. Because I think, like, for me, like, my mom is one of 10, my dad is one of 11, so I always grew up with people around me, right? When I lived in Chicago, I was always around, like, my dad's side of the family, so aunts, uncles, cousins. Then we moved to Phoenix, I was around, my mom's side of the family. And yeah, I know that it's like that for so many of us, that we've always grown up around people. And I was even having this conversation with a friend where I was saying, like, oh, it's weird for me to eat and not have, a show that I'm watching while I'm eating. And I know that that's not great, and I want to be able to eat more mindfully. And she understood, and she said, yeah, I think it's, for me, like, I grew up with, like, noise. There was always noise when we were eating, there was always people around. And I said, oh, yeah, like, yeah, I'm quite lucky that we would always have dinner together as a family, right? And yeah, even on the weekends, like, for sure, we'd have all of our 3 meals together as a family, right? Like, breakfast in the morning, like, on a weekend. And yeah, it was always people around. And it wasn't until she said that I realized, like, oh wow, yeah. I mean, I think I've been living on my own for so long. Like, I've been living out of the home for so long that it hadn't even dawned on me that that's maybe why I'm still not used to the silence, right? Because I was telling her, I was like, even if I managed to say, like, okay, don't turn on a TV show, like, just but still I have to have music on while I'm eating, right? Because otherwise it just feels too quiet. And yeah, anyway, got sidetracked a little bit there as well. Let me bring it back. But yes, what was I saying? Man, there's just so much here. The other thing that I wanted to talk about quickly, so I saw something that was saying that Ken and Asian Ken, it was kind of weird that they didn't differentiate, but that they were probably gay, right? And I even thought about that. I was like, oh, that, yeah, that's interesting. That maybe they are gay. Maybe there were feelings there, and yet they feel like, yeah, no, that in this perfect world, we can't cause any disruption, right? Ken probably felt like, no, I need to be with stereotypical Barbie, and that's just my path, right? And even the way that he said, like, I only exist when she looks at me. I know from having worked with male clients that there is so many men that do struggle with that, right? Feeling like they can't really function when they aren't in a relationship. And studies actually back this up. Studies actually show that men benefit way more from being in a marriage than women do, which, makes sense from a practical side of things because, yes, we also know, and, the study that came out after the pandemic that showed that, that women are doing, what was it, 3 times more domestic housework than men. Oh my God, it's just insane, right? And with COVID, women were doing even more housework. It's just, yeah, it's a lot. But yeah, there's quite a lot there on the practical side of things, but on the emotional side of things as well. Because when a man is dating, and this just in terms of heterosexual relationships, when a man is dating a woman, and women, tend to be more open and wanting to communicate their emotions and things like that, right? And, process their thoughts, all these things, then men start to open up a little bit more too. And I know for me, in my last relationship, this definitely happened where I felt like, wow, like if we broke up, like he would have no one to talk to, because I could see that yes, he had friends, but he knew and I knew that with those friends, it was superficial things that they talked about, and they couldn't really go deep. They had no idea how to talk about their emotions, right? And so, yeah, so sometimes there is a bit of that guilt of, if I leave this person, should I still be friends with them? Can I still be friends with them? I know someone actually submitted this question, and it was submitted after we recorded the last like Q&A episode, so couldn't answer it. But yeah, this person was asking, like, can I still be friends with my ex? And that's a tough one, and I would just say, like, examine where that's coming from, because oftentimes it is, that guilt of, I should be friends with the ex for them, not so much for me, but for them, because I feel guilty. And I've heard from so many women as well that they say, well, I need to stay friends and stay in contact with my ex because he took the breakup so hard, and he was saying that he was so down and depressed that he might kill himself, all these things, right? So yes, and of course, because I've worked in the domestic violence field, I know that sometimes it's more of a threat, right? But also, having been a therapist to male patients, I know that yes, oftentimes when men come for therapy, it's usually after a breakup. At least that's been my experience, right? It's after a divorce or a breakup or something has happened. But yeah, it can be, really hard to try to find yourself after a relationship. And I think this goes, for everyone regardless of gender. But I think for men, when they can't open up, it can be really hard. And yeah, definitely if a man is gay, then it can be really hard to, open up and come out and live your truth, because you're living in this world where that's not okay, right? So there's a lot, but I think I'll leave it there, because I think we've covered we've covered so much in this episode that I don't want to keep going because I think there's so much there to unpack with Barbie, but I think I've given you more than enough to think about. And we're just going to continue having these conversations on the podcast. I mean, I loved doing the workshops and trainings last month, and I thought it was a beautiful way for us to come together as a community and talk about things that we can't talk about with our friends, with our family. And sometimes, it's just so nice to be in a community with other daughters of immigrants. And so yes, if you haven't heard yet, I will let you know that Pauline and I are launching a group program. We're super excited about it. It's called Roots and Bridges, and it's all about empowering immigrant daughters in dating and relationships. So helping them navigate, helping them actually find out what it is that's holding you back from dating, from, having a good relationship, whether it's romantic, whether it's with a family member, with a friend, with yourself. We're going to be talking about all things related to relationships, all different types of relationships, with siblings as well. I know so many people, they come to therapy like, I need to work things out with my sibling, right? Like, why are we so different? Why are we fighting so much? Like, relationships are complicated. They're messy. They're difficult to untangle. So that's what we're going to be doing in this program. We're going to be healing as a community. We're going to be learning as a community and growing. And it's all about getting to the root of the problem, right? Because I think so many of us, we're doing surface level things, I think so many of us were, what's known as self-help junkies, that we're reading all the self-help books, listening to all the self-help podcasts. We're doing all these things, Some of us were in therapy, some of us are not in therapy yet, but sometimes even that can feel like, whoa, there's so much to cover in one-on-one therapy, that you might need a bit of support. You might need a bit of that community to be around other people who are going through the same things, who can understand. Because I think for so many of us, that's what comes more natural for us, right? We've grown up surrounded by people, surrounded by the aunties, surrounded by the cousins, big families, lots of siblings maybe. Or maybe you didn't grow up like that. Maybe you grew up as an only child, but in your culture, everyone else has tons of siblings, tons of aunts and uncles. Like, I have, talked to some people who, they feel like they're missing that community, right? They didn't get that chance, I know I've talked to some friends who are daughters of immigrants, and they've grown up in a totally different country to their parents, but also to where their cousins and aunts and uncles live. So they grew up a bit isolated from that big family network and that big support, right? So whatever it is that you're looking for, I think we're going to have it there for you. We're going to have that beautiful community for daughters of immigrants. We're going to be learning, unlearning, relearning. We're going to be doing all the things. So yes, if you're interested in joining, I will pop that link in the description of this episode. We're going to be starting in a few months, so that will be really, really good. So yes, but I hope you enjoyed today's episode. My thoughts on Barbie as a therapist, thoughts on machismo, the patriarchy, sex, perfectionism, like all the things. I'm always so excited to do these episodes. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, I am here to be open, honest, and vulnerable with you, because you are not alone. If you want to support this podcast, please make sure to leave a review so others can find it as well. If you're interested in working with me, you can find me at www.globalcitizentherapy.com. And if you'd like to heal your relationship with self-care and learn more about how to find the type of soul care that works for you, you can find the link to my workshop in the description of this podcast episode. Thank you again, and see you next time.